The purpose of this podcast is to educate and inform. It is no substitute for professional care by your doctor or your qualified healthcare professional. Never disregard or delay professional medical advice because of something you've heard on this podcast or in any linked material. Guests who speak on this podcast express their own opinions, experience, and conclusions. Dr. Shirley neither endorses nor opposes any particular opinion discussed on this podcast. The views expressed on this podcast have no relation to those of any academic, hospital, practice, institution, or other entity with which Dr. Shirley may be affiliated.
Welcome to Forever Fab, the podcast on fashion, the art of living, and all things beauty. This podcast is curated by Dr. Shirley Madhere, MD, as the definitive source of holistic wellness through beauty.
Hey everyone, it's Dr. Shirley. Welcome to 15 Minutes of Fab, a segment of the Forever Fab podcast where I review products, services, experiences, and frankly, whatever, in 15 minutes or less. If the full-length podcast is a couture dress, for example, then 15 Minutes of Fab is like a button-down French cuff white shirt paired with leather leggings. If you don't have time to tune into the full-length podcast, then check out 15 Minutes of Fab, just a small dose. Some have considered it truth and beauty or plastic surgery secrets or as a nerdy or academic take on wellness and beauty with a dash of fashion. Consider it what you may. My aim is to engage you as a credible and authoritative voice in most, if not all aspects of beauty and wellness with a dash of fashion. That includes products, wellness services, technologies, innovations, new scientific research, and plastic surgery. As the founder of Holistic Plastic Surgery, my approach to beauty is through a lens of wellness that's grounded in science, backed by medical study and research, strengthened by my clinical experience, and bolstered by my surgical training with the use of principles and techniques of plastic surgery. And then there's my love of fashion. Of course, I feel uniquely qualified to talk with you about beauty, wellness, aesthetics, and plastic surgery, as well as products and services within those spaces, not only because of my extensive, and may I add, expensive training and expansive background, but also because I'm one of you. Many of the human issues around aging and being a fierce fab person, as well as an agent for positive change, I live these too, and I try. You're not alone. So together we can help the world become a more beautiful, forever fab place. So if you'll have me and give me at least 15 minutes of your time, let's get at it. In this new year, I've decided that it will be one of expansion and discovery. So I'll explore all sorts of topics, near and possibly far-fetched, while still focusing on the topics that make the Forever Fab podcast, well, fabulous, namely fashion, the art of living well or wellness, and beauty. As part of my philosophy of holistic plastic surgery, which I created well over probably now 15 years ago, where I believe that beauty emanates from within, wellness plays an integral role in my practice. And this goes for many aspects of life that help you to live in grace and beauty, including nutrition, exercise, products, services, technologies, mind, body, spirit, and science. This episode of 15 Minutes of Fab on the Forever Fab podcast is dedicated to discovery. The title of this week's episode of 15 Minutes of Fab is The Long Game: Innovations in Longevity Science. If you want to live a long, healthy, and beautiful life, there's some things you just have to do. Along with eating well, exercising adequately, fostering a positive outlook, living by the FAB Five rules for a beautiful life, science is providing other ways we should pay attention to. This episode of 15 Minutes of Fab, I introduce you to a specific protein that may help extend your life. Now, David Andrew Sinclair, who is a tenured professor in the Department of Genetics at Harvard, said, and I quote, "Only 20% of our longevity is genetically determined. The rest of it is what we do, how we live our lives, and increasingly the molecules that we take. It's not the loss of our DNA that causes aging, it's the problems in reading the information, the epigenetic noise, end quote. Well, one of the sounds within that epigenetic noise is related to this protein. Studies have shown that when this particular protein is deficient, lifespan decreases. Yet, on the contrary, when this protein is present and overexpressed, the opposite occurs. Lifespan is extended. This protein is the Klotho protein, spelled Klotho. It's an anti-aging protein that is primarily produced in the kidney, but it is also found in the brain, the pancreas, that's the organ that produces insulin, blood vessels, and your skin. According to scientists at the NIH, quote, circulating levels of Klotho decrease with age, and the Klotho gene is associated with increased risk of age-related diseases, end quote. These authors at the NIH also add that the Klotho protein is involved in a number of important physiologic processes in the body, including aging, vitamin D metabolism, the regulation of the development of chronic diseases, regulation of oxidative stress, growth factor signaling, homeostasis, or the body's state of healthy equilibrium, organ protection, the suppression of inflammation, and mineral metabolism. That's a lot. We all know all living things age and die. This is the straightforward nature of life. The paper at the NIH goes on to state that, quote, in ancient Greek mythology, the three fates, they are named Klotho, Lachesis, and Atropos. They were the daughters of Zeus and Themis, and they determined the duration of life, as is Greek mythology. It was believed that Klotho spins the thread of life, Lachesis determines its length, and Atropos cuts it. The Klotho gene is named after the Moirai, which is one of the three fates, and the one in particular who spins the thread of life, end quote. Another scientific paper states that the Klotho gene is also involved in the following functions. Number 1, phosphate, calcium, and vitamin D regulation. Number 2, antioxidant activities. Number 3, prevention of chronic fibrosis or scarring, abnormal scarring. Number 4, protective effects against cardiovascular disease. Number 5, anti-cancer or tumor suppressor activities. Number 6, metabolic regulatory functions relevant to diabetes. Number 7, anti-senescence or anti-aging functions and stem cell preservation. Number 8, protection against neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's. And this is quoted from a research website called frontiersin.org. All of this sounds super interesting, right? Okay, so where can we get more of this Klotho protein? You'll be happy to know that in general, we all have a copy of this gene responsible for producing the Klotho protein. The trick, however, is to live a lifestyle where you can help to increase the expression of that gene. Do note that because you have a copy or even two of a gene, does not necessarily mean that that gene will be activated to express the product it's responsible for. So, in order to help stimulate the gene to produce more of the Klotho protein to help you live a longer life, there's some things you just have to do. You've heard some of these tips for overall longevity, not only on this podcast, but I'm sure from other sources as well. It turns out that some of what you may already be doing may help you to increase the expression of the Klotho protein. And these include exercise and sports, and some say for at least 3 consecutive months, diet, vitamin D supplementation, and in fact, even some medications. Now, regarding diet, there are other genes that are involved in aging and longevity. They are referred to as FOXO or FOXO. Some of these FOXO genes are also regulated by Klotho, and that Klotho enhances FOXO function. Now, there are a wide number of FOXO genes, but there are some FOXO genes in particular that interact with Klotho. FOXO may be supported by a diet rich in quercetin, ginseng, and green tea. So whoop whoop for you if those are already in your diet. Now, there are some medications that have a secondary effect of reestablishing Klotho levels back to normal, because it's safe to assume that if you have chronic diseases, maybe your Klotho levels, the levels of that protein are low, or the expression of that protein by the gene is low. So medications which aim to improve the chronic illness may in fact work by somehow stimulating that Klotho gene or increasing the production of the Klotho protein. Now, these are medications that are already in clinical use for therapy of other illnesses, such as the treatment of high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, vascular or blood vessel disease, and organ transplantation or organ transplant rejection. You'll be pleased to know that in absence of these diseases, there are drugs currently being tested for the sole purpose of increasing Klotho to help extend human life. But clearly, more time and research are needed. Also, know that Klotho is just one gene that's involved in anti-aging and longevity. It is not the whole story. There are probably a number of genes and proteins that help to shape how long we live. The scientific race is on to help discover the vast universe of human genes and frankly, how their proteins interact in the body to affect the quality and length of our life. Also, know that extending lifespan is not necessarily the same as extending health span. Ideally, the two must be well managed together in order for you to live your most beautiful life. So while researchers, scientists, and clinicians are steadfastly working on the next longevity discoveries, what can you do in the meantime? I suggest you live by the FAB Five rules. Shall I review them for you? Number 1, good nutrition. Number 2, adequate daily hydration. Number 3, consistent, restful sleep. Number 4, frequent and effective stress management. And number 5, mind, brain, and soul nourishment and protection with social support, purpose-driven living, and daily learning. This concludes this episode of 15 Minutes of Fab on the Forever Fab podcast. As always, stay beautiful and forever fabulous, inside and out.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Forever Fab, the podcast on fashion, the art of living, and all things beauty, curated by Dr. Shirley Madhere, MD. Live beautifully and help make the world a more beautiful place.